love them country, bad love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. This a fi we, we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a fi we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head and the Belize.
Morning and welcome to the first edition of Sunday Review for the Western Christian Gregorian calendar of marking time and space. They said that 2023. Now we know they're not that, Well, for the one that we know, right? They're not that. Then they use the Christian timeline, but we know for we African ancestors, a conservative timeline is at least, we're talking 6,000 years ago. So there are a number of people I have to acknowledge up front. This will probably make sense of the news. So stories that make the news, we expand on it in this space to develop our awareness and our knowledge and to connect with our African people and people of color globally. Secondly, this is the 15th season of Sunday Review. So I've been doing this 15 years now, producing and hosting Sunday Review. And the theme song is played by Papa Curly, a Belizean artist living in the United States. You see, I have a new backdrop. Our sister Kebe from Kebe's Corner on Facebook donated the African fabric. So when I want African products, go to Kebe's Corner on Facebook. Now, our guest for the first guest for the year, of course, it had to be our sister Esther Stanford-Xosei from the United Kingdom. London specifically, and Sister Esther in this capacity is here as a reparations specialist and a scholar activist. Welcome, Sister Esther.
Greetings, Sister YaYa.
It's a joy to see you for the season.
Thank you, and you too. And greetings to all who are partaking of this program too.
Thanks, sis. For the past year, for the entire 2022 cycle, UEF with our solidarity partners in the UK agreed, the state isn't doing it. So as you know how we behave at UBAD Educational Foundation, Zinc Fence, we take ownership of what's in our best interest. So we decided to have a year-long, once a month, awareness, advocacy about African reparations, and we stuck to that commitment for 12 Sundays in 2022. We're going to do the same thing for 2023. The focus is African reparations. What's distinctly different in the 2023 cycle is we're really going to focus on ecocide for Belize, especially because of the Blue Bond conversation and because of the Maya Forest Corridor Project conversation, which a lot of people still don't know about in Belize. So, Sister Esther, tell us a little about yourself as a reparations specialist, scholar activist, and the formations that you either founded or co-founded with other Pan-Africanist people in the UK.
So thank you for that. I basically am a reparationist, which is a reparations scholar activist, and my background is that of law, really. I'm sort of an interdisciplinary scholar activist in terms of law and history in particular. And so I've spent, a couple of decades now working on the project of African reparations. And in that regard, I've been part of many reparations formations. First starting out, I guess I would say, the Global African Congress, which is an organization that was founded in 2002. I was involved with that, with co-founding it, actually. Ceased to be involved a year later, but I still mention it. I was also involved with, and continue to be involved, actually, with the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe, which preceded the Global African Congress, actually. And I continue to be the co-vice chair of the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe. And the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe has been involved with co-founding and initiating many other kind of reparations initiatives and structures, including the African Emancipation Day Reparations March Committee in the UK, of which I'm the official spokesperson, the Stop the Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide Ecocide campaign, and also we've been involved in establishing the International Network of Scholars and Activists for African Reparations, which is an important network, international network, that looks at the knowledge that we are producing around our struggle to effect and secure holistic African reparatory justice. So those are some of the main formations. I'm involved with, several others, including more recently being involved with establishing an initiative called the University of Repair, which looks at popular education on African reparations in particular, in association with an organization called Decolonizing the Archives. And I'm sure there's probably several other organizations that I'm part of that I haven't mentioned that I probably should be mentioning. I do a lot of cross-community work as well. Even though I'd say probably a substantial part of my work is working with African heritage communities, the nature of African reparations and the kind of global changes that we need to see and be part of bringing about in order that we can effect and secure African reparatory justice, means that as an African reparationist, it's important to engage with other liberation struggles of other peoples who are also seeking to transform our world as a result of the impacts of what we as Africans refer to as the Maangamizi. So literally the African Holocaust and continuum of chattel enslavement, colonization, and neo-colonization. And so in that regard, I've been involved with co-founding the Extinction Rebellion Internationalist Solidarity Network, which is part of a movement called Extinction Rebellion that really formed to tackle the climate and ecological crisis, which was, I guess, is much more relevant to the notion of ecocide. And within that time, I've also been involved with co-founding the Extinction Rebellion, Being the Change Affinity Network, which is a specific section of people within the Extinction Rebellion movement who are prioritizing issues of decolonization, reparatory justice, but in particular the notion of what we refer to as planet repairs, and also sort of anti-racist perspectives in alignment with communities of resistance in the global south. And so not everyone who is concerned about the climate and ecological crisis actually recognizes the colonial roots of this crisis, and therefore its connection to African reparations. But there is a specific set of people within Extinction Rebellion, including some of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, that do. And so those are some of the sort of cross-community structures that I'm also part of, and take every opportunity I can get, really, to engage with other reparations movements, because we are not going to transform our world just by ourselves. And even when we focused on African reparations, the reality is Africa as a supercontinent is not going to be left alone as long as Africa continues to actually have all these resources. And so it means that when we are factoring in our liberation plans, we need to recognize that Africa will always be a target, and therefore African people, as long as we have things that other people want and will feel that they need in order to continue their own, I don't know if I can use the word civilization building, but in terms of their own kind of progression. So the notion of, say, foreign policy and how the United States government will see its foreign policy interests as extending into Africa, which is why there's justification for literally funding a conflict and wars in order to destabilize African societies so that people will be fighting each other, and whilst that's happening, these imperial forces can continue to extract resources that they then use to build military technology that is used to continue destabilizing and dispossessing indigenous and other African people on the planet. You're on mute, Sister YaYa.
Sorry, sis, because I'm listening to you. Thank you, Sister Esther, for sharing what you just shared with us and making the connections between Europeans, primarily, the extraction of natural resources on the continent of Africa, and how that impacts African people, African descendants globally. And especially as it relates to the climate crisis, climate change conversation, oftentimes that connection is not made to African people and the continent of Africa, wherever African descendants are globally. What's your definition of reparations and reparatory justice?
So sometimes you will hear the terms reparations and reparatory justice used interchangeably. Yeah, I actually have a tendency to do that. I prefer using the term reparatory justice because the term reparations is misunderstood. People are very miseducated about it, and in popular kind of discourse, certainly in the English language, the term reparations is often deemed to be synonymous with financial compensation. Whereas the notion of reparations in international law, even from a holistic perspective around knowledge production, does not mean financial compensation, or, to put it bluntly, money. It doesn't. It means to repair, And so the term reparations holistically means much more than money. Yeah, I mean, that might be a part of it for some people, as long as we live in a system that uses money. But as people know, we're moving into a world system where they're moving into digital currency, right? It's not actual physical money. So everything has its time. But essentially, reparations comes from the root reparer, meaning to repair. And that becomes necessary when there has been harm, there has been injuries caused, there has been a violation of people's rights, and they become, victimized by systems of colonization, for instance, dispossession. That then triggers a right to a remedy for that harm and that wrongdoing, and whatever violations are committed against a people or a group. And that remedy is also reparations. Reparations holistically, there might be other remedies that people kind of seek, but the kind of international law framework refers to the term a right to a remedy and reparations. So it's not kind of assuming that for all people, reparations will be ultimately everything that they can seek as a remedy. And this is where knowledge matters. Whose knowledge matters, and what knowledge is that we're centering. So I refer, as a reparationist, there are, part of the international social movement for African reparations, which is not, it is a movement. It's just the way that some of us, particularly within PARCO, the Pan-African Reparations Coalition, have defined our movement for African reparations to distinguish it from other people who are seeking reparations. Yeah, because there is this notion that somehow reparations is just about us, and you'll often hear reparations for slavery. Well, people of African heritage are not the only people who went through forms of slavery. Yeah, and so when we're talking about movements It's that we have to recognize there are other people who are also struggling to effect and secure some type of reparations. Yeah. So the knowledge that I share comes from the lived experience, the intergenerational movement that we refer to as the International Social Movement for African Reparations. And that is part of a wider movement referred to as the PRIM, that's the acronym, the PRIM, meaning the People's Reparations International Movement, which means reparations for all other peoples. And actually, there have been Caucasian peoples who have reparations movement, often tied to the fact that many ordinary working people were dispossessed of land, the so-called commons in Europe. As part of European expansion and imperial endeavors, what they began to do was privatize lands here in Europe first. Yes? And that was kind of synonymous with the kind of colonial sort of going around the world and taking lands from other people. So, and of course, there are other people like all other indigenous people on the planet, and people from, India, other parts of Asia, etc., etc. Yes, and so for me, reparations as an African reparationist, we recognize two main frameworks: the conceptual framework, which I've spoken about before on this show, which is advanced by Professor Chinwezu, that really speaks to all kinds of repairs, economic, social, political, educational, etc., etc., repairs of every type that we need in order to rebuild ourselves, repairs of our mind, our sense of kind of collectivity, our sense of unity, and all of that. And then there is the operational framework, which is the United Nations guidelines on a right to a remedy and reparations, which was really sort of synthesized in 2005. But reparations, even within sort of European societies, is an old concept, and certainly from African societies, we trace it back to the Mandé Charter of in terms of the peoples based in Mali. So it's ancient, predates the Magna Carta, okay? So it's an ancient principle around what reparations mean. Now, I spoke about knowledge because part of colonization was also about what's called epistemicide, which is like to kill knowledge, people's knowledges, and their knowledge systems. And so a lot of what we knew, our value systems, our cultures, were demonized. And part of especially Christian missionary education was about trying to civilize us, which meant really making us into sort of carbon copies of Europeans, but not everything that they were even entitled to in their societies. So there was still a fear of us being able to write and read in English and all of that kind of stuff, because it would have meant that we would have known that a lot of the teachings and doctrines we were being given were being distorted, and using texts like the Bible, etc., to do so. So the knowledge system that we use is really important. And part of the challenge or the legacies, I should say, of colonialism has been that we are using, oftentimes we resort to or we privilege and prioritize European norms, and framework. So even around reparations, if we reduce reparations to just money, that is Eurocentric, because our indigenous societies have never privileged money, ever. So this is the problem when we're using measurements to kind of remedy harms that our people have experienced intergenerationally, but using measurements and guidelines that actually do not recognize our indigenous African and our diaspora African knowledge frameworks. So one of the ways in which we identified wealth, for instance, in some African societies was around the notion of how big your families were. because the more children, the more, and in some cases in societies, it might have even been wives, several wives, the wealthier you were deemed to be, yeah, in terms of a household. It's seen totally different now in this society, because if somebody has what is called, quote unquote, too many children, that's often demonized. There's something wrong with you, yeah, if you have too many children. So you see, it's a different kind of framework, because people are not valued in that way, whereas in our societies they were. And also this notion of land, connection to land, that was part of our wealth, because not in terms of property and privatization, but in terms of connection to land as a living, sentient being, Mother Earth, yeah, connection to ancestors, ancestry, lineage, which meant heritage, culture, civilization, progress, all of which had to be decimated and severely disrupted, and in some cases destroyed, in order to reduce us from being full human beings into being, you know, 1/5 of a human being, which was the case in, say, North America, North YaYa, in terms of the US Constitution. And a lot of the so-called quote-unquote slave code laws were premised on the fact that we were not meant to be full human beings. Therefore, we were not entitled to rights, we were not entitled to have access to property, etc., etc. Yes? And so I say all of that to say this, that the notion of reparations that we're working with, especially if we talk about international law, where one of the first principles of reparations, beyond sort of stopping the harm that's continuing, is this notion of restitution. Yeah, which is to put a people or a group back in a position we would have been in but for the Ma'angamisi, in its 3 phases of chattel enslavement, colonization, and modern day neo-colonialism. Yeah, and so when we think about restitution, that means restituting ourselves to ourselves, our knowledge systems, our sense of value, our sense of what true wealth is, yeah, our belief systems, our cultural frameworks, how we organize our societies, how we organize our economics, what we teach our children so that they can continue on our lineage. All of that is essential in terms of restitution. And it has been kind of probably best exemplified by the movement to return to Africa. Commonly spoken of as repatriation, but when we kind of look from an African-centered perspective, we know that we don't return to a fatherland, because for us, land is not masculine. Land is always feminized in terms of mother. We don't talk about Father Earth. We talk about Mother Earth, yes, in terms of the feminine principle and the notion of how gender kind of plays out in nature, yes? And so this notion of returning to our mother, returning to Africa that we were ripped from, if we're thinking about restitution, that would entail restoring our right to belong to our homeland, that today we call Africa. It's not a right to belong to neo-colonial Bantustans or nation states, yeah? Professor Chinwezu calls them Bantustans, which is something that was very much part of the South African apartheid experience. So these little kind of fragile, unviable states that often exist in Africa, where the borderlines actually don't make sense, but they were based on notions of European trade, commerce, industry, etc., which was part of the colonization experience. And so what they did is they created countries without regard to the indigenous ways in which we organize our societies, and how kind of people groupings, indigenous African ethnicities and nationalities, peopled the continent of Africa. Yeah, and that is why today you will have, say, Eves, who you can find in the countries of Ghana, in Benin, in Togo, in Nigeria. Yeah, but they're one people. Yeah, who were cut off from each other because one European power claimed ownership of one part of the land where they happened to be. Yeah, and that story plays out across the whole of Africa. And so often when you see civil conflict and strife, when you trace the origins of these conflicts, and in some cases war, yeah, and in some cases, extreme examples, we get Rwanda, where there's a recognition that there was a genocide, yeah? When you look at the roots of these conflicts amongst ourselves, you will see it's a lot to do with the way in which those people themselves were separated, redefined, put in nation states where they perhaps became minorities, where they had previously been part of a more powerful group. And so those battles always kind of continue, because people don't forget who they are. People don't forget their ancestry. People know when they've been dispossessed and where originally they should have, their people settled in a particular area, and now they no longer have access to the area. And that is what kind of builds up that propensity for conflict that has been generated by these borders of colonialism that actually produce structural violence. That's what it does. And so when you have people who are forced to be together or who are separated from other people that make up their group, that leads to conflict, because people remember and they naturally resist that desire to minimize them, to marginalize them, to disempower them, especially when it's coming from an opposing force, a colonial power. Yes? And so I was speaking about that in the context of rematriation and this desire to return to Africa. And so when we're thinking about African reparations, that is one of the oldest notions. It wasn't pay us. Our people were not saying, okay, you can take our homeland, you can actually, obliterate our ancestry and our ancestors, you can steal all our cultural and sacred and hallowed property, for which many people saw as a physical embodiment of ancestors, like Benin bronzes. Yeah, they're not just statues and masks and so forth. They were physical representations and reminders of ancestors. That's how they are perceived in our African language systems. We didn't say, yeah, you can keep all of that. Take our ancestors away and lock them up in your dusty, dirty, cold museums. No, we wanted to return. And that is why, from the time we were captured, there was so much resistance on the continent of Africa. There was resistance on the ships when they took us and captured us there. And many people actually threw themselves aboard over ships in order to return when they realized and when they could break free, because there were so many mutinies on ships. Yeah, the resistance didn't just happen in North America, in other parts of the Caribbean, etc., etc., and in South America. It happened everywhere we were taken. But part of what we are denied is knowledge of our own story. Yeah, but within the notion of this story, this African history, her story, our story, the meaning of African reparations is really, there are 5 kind of principles to it, or strands, right? The first one is that African reparations means it has to embody the harmonization of approaches to reparations for African people globally. Why? Because, for instance, take yourself in Belize and a Belizean identity. Yeah, what is that? What is that based on? When was the country Belize formed? That cannot be the beginning of your ancestry as an African, whose ancestors would have been kidnapped from Africa, captives of war, prisoners of war, trafficked into the diaspora. Yeah, and so wherever we are on the planet, we have to rediscover our connection to each other. Now there's a big rise in DNA services and products. I'm not advocating that, because that's not the full answer, but people are using it more and more to determine ancestry. Yes? So, irrespective of where we were born, where our parents may have been born, what passport or citizenship we hold, that is only part of our story. Yeah. And you know, we are a long memory people. We literally carry the DNA of all of our ancestors, you know, our foremothers, our forefathers. And so part of our duty as African people is to rediscover those connections to each other rather than reinforce forms of identity and citizenship that were part of our colonization and part of Europeans separating families and therefore telling us, no, you are so and so, I'm going to call you Toby, I'm going to call you Joe. You're not even going to have a surname. And we're going to rip your children from you. We're going to sell them we're going to sell them all over the place so that you will never build your power base as a family. Because you don't even know where your children have gone. They've been we're renaming them. And then after a couple of generations, they forget the language, they forget where they come from. Yeah, they don't necessarily have a vision of we're going to return because it has just been made too hard, because they're living in a state of unfreedom. Secondly,
one second, Sister Esther. It's time for me to go to break. So we'll break there, but we have point one. We'll go to the other 4 points in the second segment, get a definition of planet repair, and expand that conversation. Stay tuned, people. Break time.
Thank you.
Lately, many things have changed. We changed, of course, but we're still the same. During this pandemic, information is our main partner. The most widely known antimicrobials are called antibiotics, but they are useless to fight diseases such as COVID-19 because it is caused by a virus, whereas antibiotics cure diseases of bacterial origin. Therefore, if you feel sick, do not self-medicate. Consult a health professional qualified to write a prescription and take antibiotics only when prescribed.
Smart continues to expand its internet coverage countrywide to help you live a smarter life.
Our villagers are very happy. They are pleased to know that Smart went the extra mile to put a tower in our village so that our villagers can get live stream on their TVs and they can get their kids doing their online classes. I want to say to Smart, thank you for making it possible for us to get internet in Gardenia Village. We really do appreciate it.
Smart continues to take the internet and mobile services to communities across Belize. Now save even more when you bundle your Smart broadband with Smart mobile services. Smart, bringing people together.
We all need a vacation, a break, an escape, a getaway from the ordinary. Have fun and try new things. Create lasting memories. Make your vacation one to remember. Come in today and apply for an easy credit vacation loan at any of our Atlantic Bank branches. We have great interest rates, convenient repayment terms, and loan packages for all your traveling adventures. Let us work hard for you, because life should be easy.
Atlantic Bank, building the future together.
Patriots, all people who love them country bad, love them homeland, will never give it up to another nation. This happy we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This happy we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. So don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar, because patriots, all people who love them country bad, love them homeland, will never give it up to another nation. This happy we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This happy we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. So don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar, because patriots, patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland, will never give it up to another nation. This a fi we, we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a fi we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me. My name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland, will never give it up to another nation. This a fi we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a fi we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me. My name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland, will never give it up to another nation. This a fi we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a fi we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me. My name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. Don't.
To the second segment of the first edition of Sunday Review, where we make sense of the news and are still bragging about it. We're the only news review talk show in the country since 2012. The only one. I never asked myself how come no other media host not try to duplicate it. With a fire! We look at news stories and then we expand on those news stories to build awareness and knowledge of our listeners and viewers. We're also simulcasting on Krem Radio. We're live streaming on Krem Television, our Facebook page, so people can go back and listen to this conversation at their convenience from Facebook. Our guest this morning, no stranger by now, our sisters and brothers, African people from the United Kingdom, have been with us consistently over the past year, sharing about African reparations. Sister Esther, you were in the process of sharing. What are those 5 points called? You just shared point number one.
I was talking about the meaning of African reparations.
Go ahead, Sister Esther.
And the reason why that's important, just to recap, to focus on the meaning of African reparations is because oftentimes we focus on, when we use the term as African-centered people, even though we might be in the Caribbean or Europe or the America, wherever, is this notion of because people of African heritage are advocating it. So then that makes it, because we ourselves are of African heritage or will claim Africaneity, that makes it African reparations. No, it does not. Because we can be who we are in our bodies and our melanin and all of that, and we can have a European mind. We can be promoting Eurocentricity rather than Africaneity, yes? And so that's what's called descriptive advocacy or representation, which is where just because someone is from your group, your specific country area, your community, that somehow you're going to be unified just because you look the same and you might live in the same area. No. The notion of African reparations really sort of focuses on substantive Africanness. What is the body? What is the essence, the ethos, the value system that we're advocating? And is that leading us towards Africa, or is it taking us to kind of try and get more integrated or assimilated into Europeanness, yeah, and Eurocentricity, yeah? And so the first one was about harmonizing meanings of and approaches to reparations. Second aspect of African reparations is all African reparationists throughout time have emphasized the reclamation of Africa, including our right, especially those of us who have been stripped of our birthright, our citizenship, our identity, our language, our lineage, don't even know what our true African lineage is, the right to reclaim that as part of our Africanness. So African reparationists do not feel or believe that we can gain repair as satellite communities just in the diaspora, disconnected from our power base, which is the source of our being, Africa, the motherland. Yeah? All African reparationists connect their local strategies for organizing or regional or wherever they're based to the liberation and the unification of Africa. That's what makes it African reparations. Why? Because it centers Africa. Just like for a Jewish person who is dispossessed of the notion of a homeland, will center Israel wherever they live. They could live in North America. They could live in South Africa. Wherever they are on the planet, they know that Israel is their power base. And it actually defends them worldwide. Yeah? So this notion of returning to Africa, reclaiming an African identity, is known as rematriation. To rematriate, to return to the ways of our living mother, which is our living mother is Mother Earth, but it's particularly that part of Mother Earth that our umbilical cord of our ancestors was formed and was buried in the earth, in Mother Earth, yeah, which is Africa. That's important to a group's sense of identity, who they are, their sense of peoplehood. And part of what we used to know was, I am so-and-so, the daughter or the son of so-and-so, the son or daughter of so, and it went back. We were able to recite our whole lineage because it meant something, that we knew who we were and we knew what our responsibility was to our lineage, our clan, okay? And so for us, we see this process of return as being part of what in sort of English language we would say is developing sort of communities, autonomous communities of what's called non-territorial autonomy, yeah? And what that means is where you have a right to land and you have a right to build community, but you recognize that you might be building your sense of community in a nation state, in a land, on a landmass, in a region that you don't really have full sovereignty of. And it might be because those lands were colonized by Europeans or any other colonial force, and that involved dispossessing the rightful kind of stewards of that land, who still have that ancient historic claim on the right to belong. An example of that is, say, North America, North YaYa, yeah, the United States of America, where that land, the majority of it was indigenous land, all different indigenous nations. And European colonizers coming from Europe went and dispossessed the indigenous people. Now, those people still exist. They didn't all get killed off. And those people have been restoring themselves, trying to restore forms of sovereignty. And they're saying this land was not yours to give. And that becomes part of the, you know, little tension between African people and other indigenous people that inhabit North YaYa. Because one of the promises of the United States government in terms of General Sherman was that African people on so-called emancipation would receive 40 acres and a mule. Now, indigenous nations are saying, but this land wasn't yours to give away. You stole it from us. How can you then seek to remedy another group's, you know, repair that you have oppressed by trying to say to them, well, just because we developed plantations and you were the workers on that plantation, that you can have that land as a compensation. So do you see the ethical tensions there? Yeah? And that is why it's important to recognize that this kind of returning means that sometimes we inhabit land, and we might have been there centuries, but we must never forget who that land was originally kind of looked after, stewarded by. I don't use the term ownership because they didn't see their relation to land as being about property. Yeah. And so we see this as part of building you know, when we talk about the ultimate goal, I mentioned like the Jewish people, the state of Israel was an embodiment of their reparation struggle. They didn't just say, give us compensation. Yeah, people focus on that. But the first act of repair for Jewish people was, we've been dispossessed of a homeland. Yeah, from the time that we stopped inhabiting Jerusalem, Israel, etc. in AD 70, we haven't had a homeland. We've been diasporas. We've been persecuted because we haven't had a power base. So the Allied forces supported the Jewish kind of leadership, intelligentsia, political leadership, economic leadership, to develop a nation state called Israel, that they called Israel. Yeah, that was for them, that was a restitution of a homeland, which, by the way, they originally were thinking about establishing in what the country today, or the landmass today that we call Uganda, or that is called Uganda. Okay? But yet we as Africans are saying reparations now, but we think we can be repaired in these little Bantustans that someone has told us, this is your identity, this is where you belong. Yeah? That is problematic. And so obviously our vision of repair is this model of a powerful union of communities that we refer to as Ma'atubuntuman, that is actually the continent of Africa, but that Ma'atubuntuman connects to her diaspora, which the African Union today will recognize as the 6th region of Africa, and there will be these communities of Africans living harmoniously, collectively, literally trying to build a new Africa wherever we are. But we know that those little kind of satellite new Africas cannot exist on their own. They have to be they have to be connected to our base, which is Africa today. Yeah? That's the second aspect. The reclamation of Africa as part of our restitution. And therefore, this notion of compensation or money or financial kind of remedy should really support restitution, because that's what Jewish people did. They used the compensation money to help build and establish a state called Israel that defends itself. I mean, I'm not going to get into the politics of Israel, but let us just look at it objectively in terms of a powerful, militarized super state that can protect the interests of its citizens worldwide and also compel other nations to also align with it. Yeah, that's the reality. So what they did, if we look at the Jewish example, they used compensation money to actually support their restitution goals. That makes sense. Yeah. Now, of course, we got to look at the Palestinian, Israel, Palestinian, that kind of state issue where you know, the Palestinians will say, this was our land. You don't have a right to establish your state and sort of brutalize us, etc., etc. So I'm not advocating that we just go and take land, whatever, but nobody can deny that Africa is ours. That's where we come from. No one can deny that. We are the people who founded civilization. Our people traveled the four corners of the earth. So no one can deny our right to belong to Africa, wherever we are, and to benefit not only from the resources that Africa produces, but to have a say in how those resources get distributed. And those resources should not be going to fund military conflicts in Iraq or Afghanistan because they are using our mineral wealth to build weapons of mass destruction to go and wage war on other members of the human family. We should be saying no. We should be stopping this extractivism at source. And Africans on the continent alone cannot do it. It requires the worldwide might, power, and unification of our people so that wherever we are, wherever we can be ambassadors for our homeland. And we can ensure that the foreign policy of the governments where we reside does not mean continued destabilization of our own homelands and home countries, etc., etc. The third aspect, in terms of African reparations, is that we recognize that we are not free. We are not emancipated, not yet uhuru, as it's called. And therefore, the pursuit of African liberation from the maangamizi of neo-colonial enslavement or neo-colonialism is a key part. So what that means practically is that we wage our reparation struggle in such a way where we can actually stop the recolonization of Africa. Yeah? We stop the attempt to pillage resources from even the lands that we have been trafficked to, that have become what's called the lands of our captivity. And we seek to liberate ourselves, emancipate ourselves and our homelands, home territories at the same time. Yeah, because if we think about the might of the USA or the European Union, where does that come from? It comes from the countries, the regions, the continents that they continue to pillage and usurp the sovereignty of people, indigenous people. The fourth principle is that all of these, that is the harmonization of approaches to African reparations globally or locally, the reclamation of Africa, including our right to belong, our right to have a say. That doesn't mean everyone's going to physically just go and move and live in Africa, but it means that wherever we are on Mother Earth, we should be having a say and shaping how resources get used, and we shouldn't be allowing resources to be used to wage war on other people who are being colonized. And we shouldn't be endorsing that in terms of African reparations. The third aspect is we do so in a way where our reparations can only come as a result of liberation struggle. We can't just be sitting back and saying, pay us. Our ancestors worked for you hundreds of years ago and they're not here to collect, and so I'm going to collect on their behalf. But yet we are running to join US Army and other kind of colonial armies that are continuing that despoliation, that dispossession, that war on our people today. We saw that when we had President Obama. Look at what's happened with the destruction of Libya. Yeah, it wasn't just all, Europeans who are doing that. A lot of the time, we are the workers that actually get used, or we allow ourselves to be used to fuel wars on our family members. And if we really knew our connection to each other, if we were in our right mind, we would say, no, I'm not going to be used to wage war on my cousin in an African country that I've been hundreds of years separated from. They are my family. If we were working with our African value systems around Ma'at and Ubuntu, we would know that what happens to our people on another continent impacts on us. Yeah, because we might not know who we are, but those who are ruling this planet certainly do. And that is why they invest in our disunity all the time, so that we won't wake up to that realization and consciousness of who we are. The fourth aspect is that all of these are central to the global strategies and the tactics that reparationists use. So it means that you in Belize connects into, as you've been doing, even with these Sunday review programs once a month, looking at an African reparations theme, you are performing a service to the international social movement for African reparations that is about promoting Ma'atu Buntu Jama, which is these satellite communities that connect into Africa. That's what you're doing. So you are part of an emerging Ma'atu Buntu Jama in Belize, and those that work with you and support you. Yeah? That is what it means. So wherever you are, get active where you are. You connect locally from where you are, your own power base, the networks that you've built up, the connections, the resources, the power base that you are able to operate from. And communications is a very powerful entity that is used in positive and negative propaganda. Positive propaganda to really conscientize our people as to their connections to each other, what we've lost, what is at stake, what we should be aiming for, wherever we are. But also it can be used negatively to actually frustrate the growth of movements that are seeking to reclaim their sovereignty and their power base. And lastly, in terms of African reparations, that all of these aspects of reparatory justice are ultimately connected to the notion of planet repairs. And that is best described for me by a quote from Professor Malena Karenga, the founder of Kwanzaa, who says in one of his papers, reparations is a process of the repairing and remaking of a people who are in the process and the practice of repairing, renewing, and remaking the world. Meaning, reparatory justice is a world remaking, civilization building project. It's not saying, okay, Mr. Oppressor, Mrs. Oppressor, we've lost kind of all hope that we can ever kind of rid ourselves of your oppression. And all we want is just give us a little bit higher, give us a better seat at your table. Even though you control the table, and we accept that, yeah, you can steal all our resources. It's okay. We'll just continue working for you as literally slaves, right? So what Chinweizu was really arguing is, no, the whole world was turned upside down. And part of the repair on doing that harm is we got to remake the world, because we lost a world. We didn't just lose our place in someone else's world, we lost the world. How have we gone from being mothers and fathers of human civilization to being reduced to being footnotes in the annals of the European, the Arab story? How has that happened? Yeah? When the people who are the mothers and fathers now become literally the children. That's what the situation we're in. So how can there be repair when we continue to literally have a foot on our neck? So that's why the liberation process, planet repairs, this becomes relevant to what we really want to be talking about today in terms of ecocide. Because going back to the knowledge on reparations, what are we fighting for? We're fighting for a new world. And a new way of relating in the world, a new way of not just relating to ourselves as Africans or to other members of the human family, but a way of relating to Mother Earth. So we no longer continue in the pillaging and raping of Mother Earth under the guise of, I want to be rich, and so if I can get into a mining contract, if you can't beat them, join them. Let's also pillage the bowels of Mother Earth. This is a violation of Ma'at. It's a violation of our natural and cosmic law. Yeah? And if we were in our right minds, we would know this. So the definition of planet repairs, which has been popularized by PARCO, the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe, who really have been using this for some time to actually refer to the fact that the harm of the Maangamizi that is continuing wasn't just harm to us as African people. The harm was also to what's referred to as our planet, our Mother Earth, and our relationship with Mother Earth, whereby our own reverence for the sacredness of Mother Earth was deemed to be devil worship, fetish, libation, recognizing ancestors, calling the names of our ancestors in our rituals, remembering them was deemed to be devilish. And we either had to be Islamized or Christianized. Yeah? But yet, in many of these systems, you're still calling ancestors, but ancestors that you don't have a connection to historically. Yeah? So planet repairs refers to when safeguarding the rights of past, present, and future generations, in terms of, the right to a remedy and reparations, there is a need to proceed from a standpoint of pluriversality, which highlights the nexus of reparatory justice, environmental justice, and cognitive justice, the nexus, the connection between all of those. In articulating the impetus to repair, this is the repair aspect of reparations, holistically. What are we repairing? Spiritual communities, so for instance, the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem, I know teach this, they argue that the repair has to be first and foremost with our Creator, because part of the loss of our power was violating spiritual laws, which disempowered us and made us vulnerable and susceptible to outside colonizers. That is a viewpoint that I'm sharing. So this notion of we've got to repair something bigger than what's the fracture, the wound that we suffer is not just like soul deep, it's cosmic. Yeah, and we've become out of balance. We've become out of balance with our power, which is nature. Yeah, we've become out of balance with the energies of Mother Earth. Yeah, and so no longer are energies working in our favor, which if you go back into all of our resistance struggles, even the Haitian Revolution, the bedrock of those revolutions was African spirituality. And what we did, because we knew how to harness the power of Mother Earth, Mother Nature in our favor. And it was used in our military and other kind of tactics, okay? And that requires a knowledge system, a reclamation of a knowledge system that was demonized, that was actually made illegal in many countries in the Caribbean, became illegal to practice our own connection to our Creator. And the mechanisms that we used, whether it was the drum or any other kind of mechanism that we used to also physically express that. So when we're repairing holistically, and this is our definition, our relationship with and inseparability from Mother Earth. Some people will talk about a creator God that is often, spoken of as Father God. Yeah. Others of us refer to Mother Earth, because when we think about creation, we think about Mother Earth as a co-creator. Yeah. So if we go into the essence of our belief systems and how even we need to decolonize our own spirituality and the way in which we reinforce duality and kind of elevating just one aspect, whether it's the masculine principle or the feminine principle, that is imbalance. That is a loss of equilibrium. And our societies were based on equilibrium, ma'at, balance, the masculine and the feminine working together. Knowing though what it is that you are kind of bringing forth and what is in your kind of responsibility to elevate. And so we're repairing holistically our relationship with Mother Earth, the environment, which is our surroundings, our natural surroundings, the fact that we can't just privatize water, we can't pollute the water, we can't put chemicals in the water and think it's going to be okay. You're violating laws of nature. There's going to be a consequence in terms of human behavior, all kinds of deformities, etc., etc., etc. You can't just steal from land and keep mining land and destroying land and think that that land will produce for you. Again, it will rebel. You will get sick. The food you eat will be poisoned because of a violation of these laws. And it's not only recognizing that we have to repair this relationship with Mother Earth, the environment, but it's also the pluriverse. That's everything, the universe plus, the cosmos, everything. Because we knew that we walk this planet as gods. This notion that God was in the sky and we only met God or the Creator when we died was not our original teaching. Okay? And it's also, in terms of this definition of planet repairs, in that process of repairing, we have to give due recognition to indigenous knowledge systems. That which was demonized, that was deemed to be uncivilized, backward, but which was about promoting harmony. We knew that we couldn't just overuse the land. So monocropping was not part of our thing. We did a lot of subsistence farming. We didn't just farm big-scale industrial farming to make food for a profit that we can then sell in supermarkets around the world at extortionate costs. Okay?
I'll need to go to break, sis.
Sure.
You want to finish that thought?
Yeah. And therefore, this kind of reclamation of indigenous knowledges is in contrast to Western centric Enlightenment ideals that have separated humanity from nature and thereby justified capital exploitation and accumulation. So the beginnings of capitalism, where we saw land as property, yeah, not as what comes off the land as something that we can utilize in kind of proportion. But now it's about selling everything, capitalizing everything, put a price on everything that the big conglomerates and corporations benefit from. That is what we have to repair, because it's that has created this climate and ecological crisis that has put all of us out of sync. And the people who have always known that this would be the case are the keepers of the knowledge, the African people, the indigenous people who have lived close to land and forewarned centuries ago that we cannot continue to treat our Mother Earth, in the way that we do.
Thanks, Sister Esther. Great time, people. Stay tuned.
How can we support the emotional well-being of older adults during COVID-19? During the COVID-19 pandemic, and particularly while in quarantine, individuals, including older adults, may become more anxious, angry, stressed, agitated, or withdrawn, especially those who need healthcare assistance or have cognitive decline or dementia. Here are 4 strategies that can help you in supporting an older adult during this difficult time. 1. Communicate information and listen. Present with accurate, simple, and accessible information and facts about the COVID-19 outbreak, its progression, treatment, and effective strategies to prevent infection. Listen patiently to their needs and concerns. For older people with mild cognitive impairment or early stages of dementia, inform them of what is happening within their capacity and provide support to ease their anxiety and stress. 2. Promote positive mental and emotional health. Provide access to available mental health and psychosocial support services, also known as MHPSS services, for older adults and communicate when and how they can access them. Help older people keep regular routines and schedules as much as possible. You can also help them create new ones, including regular exercising, cleaning, daily chores, singing, painting, or other activities. Facilitate regular communication between older adults and their friends and families. 3. Help with medical needs. Make sure that older adults have at least up to 1 month of all the regular medicines that they may require. Explain how to use protective devices in a clear, concise way. Always be respectful and patient. 4. Assist with daily activities. Provide older people with details related to how and where they can get practical help if needed, like calling a taxi, dropping off supplies, having groceries delivered, and requesting medical care, as well as information on any locally available social support programs and services. For more information, consult the webpage of the Pan American Health Organization, www.paho.org/coronavirus.
Amandala is now online. You can now access Amandala's midweek and weekend issues online by logging on to our website at amandala.com.bz/news and joining our membership portal today. There's 5 easy steps to get unlimited access to weekly e-paper, archive publications, and a host of other exclusive contents. Number 1, go to Amandala's website. Number 2, navigate to subscribed areas. Number 3, choose a membership level. Number 4, check out using our secured portal. Number 5, log into the members only section. Telephone numbers 501-280-4703 or 202-4477. Fax us at 501-222-4702, or you could email at amandalapress@yahoo.com or amandalapress@gmail.com. Amandala, all power to the people.
Alert! Alert! It's a deal alert! It's a Benny's deal alert!
At Bennett's, you will find deal alerts on a wide selection of paints, including BH paints and texture light paints. Deal alert markdowns will also be applied to our complete selection of tiles, lights and fans, appliances, and much, much more. And remember, deal alert purchases will get double tickets to take part in the grand draw on December 18th to win $10,000. For more details, visit bennis.bz. Bennis, quality and savings.
That benefit are we the people supposed to pay?
The funding you pay now, but when you get old, you got funding for college, for your future.
If you miss some days from work, they should have compensated for that.
As an artist, I'm not really sure because I work for myself.
What is Social Security? Social Security is not a tax. Social Security is a very small investment in you, the worker. It's an investment that you can count on now or in the future. It is designed to replace part of your income from wages when you get sick, get injured on the job, have a baby on the way, become disabled, or even when you pass away. And even then, the widow and your kids, if under 16 years or under 21 years and in school, obtain survivor's pension. And after a lifetime of working, you can rest assured you will have a monthly retirement income. Social Security, safeguarding you, your family, your future.
Patriots, all people who love them country, bad love them homeland, will never give it up to another nation. This happy we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This happy we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots, all people who love them country, bad love them homeland, will never give it up to another nation. This happy we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This happy we with a fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it.
Back to the final segment of an absolutely knowledge-packed minutes, now into going into an hour and a half of knowledge being shared by Sister Esther Stanford-Xosei. Sister Esther, I'm not seeing you. I'm seeing a beautiful picture.
Sorry. I'm here.
Yes. And so that was a lot that you shared, Sister Esther. And I encourage Belizeans to go back and listen to these conversations. Sister Esther, one of the things I wanted you to share, there are two strategies that we know of. Well, many people in the Caribbean, when they hear reparations, the only thing, and many of us don't know the basics of reparations, and then they hear this CARICOM 10-point plan, and many people don't even know what it is. Please share the distinct difference between what is known as a CARICOM 10-point plan and reparations, and what the Pan-African African reparation strategy is. Share quickly for us the distinct difference between those two concepts and strategies when it comes to reparations.
I would say the CARICOM 10-point plan is not an African reparations plan. That's the first thing I would say. And it's in the name, CARICOM 10-point plan. CARICOM is the economic bloc for the Caribbean countries. It's not a political union, which there were attempts at it. It was called the West Indian Federation, and it fell apart. So that political union, even in terms of countries that are members of CARICOM, is still to happen. So it's really a plan, therefore, that comes out of that experience of disparateness. It doesn't centre Africa. In my explanation of African reparations, I spoke about the reclamation of Africa being central to the organising strategies, which means that Pan-Africanism has been central to African reparationists. The CARICOM 10-point plan is not a Pan-African plan. What it does, it elevates a section of African heritage people, or descendants, some people would say, in CARICOM countries, as well as so-called indigenous people, But it doesn't recognize that actually part of the restitution that is required under international law means a reclamation of Africa. So it talks about repatriation, voluntary repatriation, as one aspect of the plan. But it's just one aspect of those 10 points. It's not seen as central to the kind of building of power, the kind of dealing with the sort of identity complexes and other legacy issues that come from the loss of your power base. All of the maladaptations that we've developed. And therefore, in a Caribbean context, what you often see is the powers that get looked to have formerly been, say, USA and China. Not Africa, in terms of, well, we need to prioritize trade, industry, whatever, our connections to our homelands and the areas that our people who now inhabit Belize were taken from. That's not there in terms of the actual text that's used, in terms of the ethos. And in fact, the CARICOM plan is really much framed around development, the right to development, which is an interesting right, but the right to development is not the same as the right to reparation, because every nation state has to engage in aspects of what's called development. And this is a contested area. People like Professor Walter Rodney wrote about the underdevelopment of Africa by Europe. And a lot of what passes for development in the Caribbean, in Belize, is actually underdevelopment, because it's promoting a model of so-called development that disempowers yourselves, indigenous people, and reinforces forms of European hegemony, colonizer hegemony, whether it's to do with agricultural systems and forms, whether it's to do with extractive industries, or whatever it may be, that are based on building the hegemony of colonizers. And so the CARICOM plan really is kind of conflating the right to development, which is what states have an obligation to do. If you are independent, then you have to implement development, which gets defined in different ways. And therefore, development is something that all citizens of a country can expect to benefit from, including the children of our enslavers and colonizers. Yes, because they live in a nation state, and therefore a nation state's got to have good roads and access to, good medical services and everything that benefits everybody. Reparations in international law are a right of victims who have suffered particular harm. So when you now conflate your reparations plan with how the state does development, what you are doing is you are taking resources from the people who have been specifically impacted, and you now want to use that to shore up your government coffers to pay for your development that you are supposed to be doing because you claim you're independent. Yes? And so whatever resources come into the country, whether it's opening up for the hotel industry, tourist industry, which promotes, again, further types of extractivism and promotes countries in the Caribbean as little, holiday hedonistic areas where people can go and get their groove on. Whatever it is, why is it resources that were worked for by enslaved people, colonized indigenous people who also in some cases were enslaved and experienced genocide like us as Africans? Why do you feel that you can then usurp the rights of those descendants of people who experienced that phase of the Ma'angamizi to now decide as a state that you are going to attract resources to you as the state so you can then put that money where you see fit? At what point did African people in Belize have a referendum around your national identity? At what point were you given the choice whether you wanted to return to the countries of your origin? At what point did the state of Belize fund you to do that ancestry research so that you could know who you were? And then you have a say around whether you want to stay there or you want resources to relocate to where your power base is. At what point was there a plebiscite to determine your will? No point. No point. At what point does governance actually include you? Do you actually have a say in what the state does? There is a failure of democracy in many of these neo-colonial Bantustans called nation states, and a lot of ordinary people often feel alienated from the state unless you've got a big government job and this, that and the other. Or you can afford the kind of education, which is often miseducation, that is needed to get access to particular types of jobs anyway. So this is the point. As African people that were kidnapped, we were never given a say. We were never given a say in the USA. We were never given a say in any of the countries of the European Union. We were not given a say in other parts of Abya, yeah? North, South, Central, or what have you. And neither were African people on the continent given a say when they formed their countries at the Berlin Conference of 1884, 1885, and told people, you're no longer this, you have to accept this nation state. That is why in Namibia today, the Over-Herero and Nama people have been excluded from negotiations between the Federal Republic of Germany and Namibia. Although it was the Over-Herero and Nama people that experienced genocide that triggers a right to a remedy and reparation. And they have been arguing, we want a seat at the negotiating table. We experienced it. But the modern nation state and those who kind of see the nation state as theirs are excluding them. How can that be right? So what we're seeing are examples of where our own people then, like Animal Farm, we just replace our European colonizers. Yeah? That's not repair. Now, the alternative, the Pan-African strategy, centers Africa. But locally, we fight for our liberation where we are, but we connect that to a strategic goal, just like a Jewish person sees their strategic focus as actually preserving the state of Israel and the power base that is for them. So that anything, even if you criticize a Jewish person and you want to sort of express, condemnation for what might be happening to Palestinian people, or what have you, or the policies of the state of Israel, how often do people get accused of being anti-Semitic? Where it actually frightens the hell out of our people. I mean, an example that a lot of people can relate to, and I'm not going to comment on it, is what's happening with Kanye West. Yeah? And the what is happening to him. What happens when you speak out about certain things? What happens if you even dare to say there was certain people's involvement in our own enslavement? That doesn't mean you're indicting a whole people, but if we're dealing with truth, we have to be able to speak the truth. And if we can speak the truth about the role that our own people have played in terms of collaboration and complicity, why can't we say what other people have done? And we have to be human enough and actually ethical enough to know that because some people did something doesn't mean all people did it. Yeah? Why can't we live in a world that can respect and accept our right to that truth and our children's right to know the truth about geopolitics and why oftentimes we are at the bottom of the pecking order? Are we not human beings too? Well, clearly, many of those who continue to benefit from our lack of knowledge, our lack of power, and our lack of right to resources that we have built up intergenerationally and our intergenerational wealth, they don't feel that we have a right, that we are full human beings. Because if they did, they would know that all human beings do that. Self-defense is the first law of nature in terms of preservation. So that's where we're at.
Thanks, Sister Esther.
And always more to say on these topics.
I encourage Belizean people to listen to these conversations over and over so that we take individual responsibility in our learning and not leave it up to someone else to have the knowledge and then make decisions for us. I know that's not the norm in Belize, and I know that one aquafil basket, we're seeing those kinds of individual changes based on conversations you have with others, engagements you see on social media, and that's very encouraging. It's a process. It's going to take some time. Yet I can truly say in this season of living in Belize that Belizean people are starting to listening to other narratives, thinking for themselves, and asking some hard questions, and getting the courage to question people in authority. And I rate that for we as Belizeans at home and in the diaspora. And Sister Esther, we continue to look forward to building our solidarity with our kinfolk on the continent of Africa, in the UK, and globally. Respect to the people that you work with who are doing meaningful work at great sacrifice, because only the people want to save the people. So we really want to thank you for taking time out. It's evening time for Sister Esther in the UK. They're 6 hours ahead of us. So I want to say thank you sincerely, sis.
Thank you for inviting me onto the show. And we really didn't get to touch on the eco side very much.
We have to, next Sunday, we'll bring Sister Esther back. We usually have different guests, but next Sunday we'll bring, the first Sunday in February, we'll bring Sister Esther back so we could flesh out the eco side real good. And then we have to thank our security guard. I don't know if it's Shane who's at the security booth right now in Krem at Zinc Fence. Okay, I'm finding out. Okay, it's Harry Barcelona. Harry Barcelona is the security guard at Krem security booth. Larry G is in Krem radio studio because this is a show that is simulcasted on Krem radio. Thank you, Larry G. In Krem studio, we have our young visual artist, architect student, Jada Anderson. Thank you so much, Jada. This show will repeat this evening at 5:30, I think it is. I'll write it down. I think it's at 5:30. This show will repeat. Remember, the theme song that you hear regularly is a song by Papa Curly. He's a Belizean artist residing in, I believe it's Los Angeles. And we don't pay no money. I mean, just find the song, feel that the song really embody Belizeans who understand that if we as Belizeans don't make Belize as a territory ours. Many of us, some people think in hindsight, made the wrong choice to choose to go to the ICJ to determine our territories. And that's a part of the conversation that Sister Esther had today. And that's a conversation I want us to explore, Sister Esther, because even though, you know, we may understand that other people own territories, not owned, but had a right to those territories before colonizers came, for many of us who are now living on captured lands, like we have an identity to that land. We feel that this is the territory of Belize, and people, you know, really these human borders are like our territory. So I really don't know how people navigate that in the past, presently, going forward. That those are some. Like many Belizeans may know that the issue down south in Belize with indigenous people, there are many people in Belize who still don't understand that those indigenous Maya people have a right. For a lot of Belizeans, they're like, well, then everybody has started to own their part of Belize, and so we're not. So we need to explore that in a healthy conversation, as difficult as it may be. So that's a conversation we can look forward to in 2023 as well. And so I want to say to everyone, remember, honor the people and save the people. I encourage people to go to Facebook, and you can look for our UEF hashtag. It's hashtag BZE, African with a K, reparations UEF. Hashtag BZE, AFRIKANREP. ARATIONS UEF. We've been sharing over a year. So there's a space where Belizean people can go to learn about African reparations. The state has failed miserably, but no problem. We, the people in our communities, are taking ownership of learning in our best interests. Sister Esther, final thoughts. Anything else you want to say? You're good.
Just to thank you for the opportunity and to encourage those who are listening and viewing this program to just do their own study, do our own, part of the preparation for reparations, any type of reparations. We're specifically emphasizing African reparations, but part of that preparation is education. As much as we've been doing things and we've been active, this requires new knowledge. It requires new vocabularies, new terminologies, new conceptualizations of reality in order for us to actually reclaim the fullness of who we are, as opposed to an aspect of dehumanization that we have come to accept as our identity on the basis of us being marooned and therefore separated from our... Imagine who we would be if we had access to all our heritage, all of our cultural resources, our material resources. Imagine who we would be, what we would be creating, what our children would be grown, birthed actually knowing, and therefore actually knowing that they have a just duty to continue and add to. Imagine if we actually had access to those knowledge bases, those archives of our lineage. Though African soul, free and heal thyself, and all shall be restored to you.
Thank you,
by our own people's power.
Thank you, Sister Esther. Solidarity forever. Till next Sunday, people. Stay peaceful.
Blessings.
What them do to the Indian Maya? Holy by them.
New and existing business owners. It's